My name is Richard Leach and I work for a company called Mawdsley-Brooks. We are a company that is the largest supplier, independent supplier of licensed and unlicensed medicines to the NHS. The unlicensed side being what I'm going to be talking about today. So what I want to do is give you a quick overview of Mawdsleys and set the scene for what I'm going to be talking about, which is named patient programs. And just before I begin, I was just wondering if we could do a show of hands as to who's heard of or knows about named patient programs. So we have about a third of us that have heard of this, so that's good. What I want to talk about is the key stakeholders involved in implementing a named patient program, with the regulatory agencies, the patients, of course, themselves, the physicians, and of course the pharma companies, all of whom I do believe are represented here today. I will summarise. So to begin with, an overview of Mawdsleys. There are 6 divisions of Mawdsleys. The UK wholesale and pre-wholesale are the divisions that are the ones supplying the medicines to the NHS. Luto, which does very interesting work with looking at pills, patient information leaflets, where they test them out on people off the street to make sure they can be understood. And so for a medical device, for example, that the instructions are simple and can be understood. Positive solutions that are dealing with software and hardware for the pharmacies. But what I'm particularly interested in and what I look after is the named patient programs that we do on a global basis and licensing in new drugs. So we supply named patient programs. We normally have about 10 programs running at any one time. And these are supplied to about 27 different countries. We are supplying about 30,000 shipments to about 1,000 hospitals around the world. And the territories where we have particular activity is Europe, the Middle East, Latin America. We don't touch America, and I'll maybe come on as to why we don't. So, I want you to imagine a scenario where we have an American biotech company. This is typically a small, medium-sized American biotech company, not a global giant like BioMarin. And that American biotech company has a license in the FDA in America, treatment for a rare disease. Well, it's not going to be long before you start seeing unlicensed demand for that medicine throughout Europe and maybe other parts of the world. To the point where eventually that American biotech company will potentially license the product in Europe. So, of course, during that period, how is it a patient can access that medicine? I give an example here of a drug called Elmron for interstitial cystitis that did have orphan drug designation, but not anymore, but that's another story. And it was licensed in America in 1996, but it's only now, just this summer, been licensed in Europe. So for the best part of 20 years, patients have been taking this drug on an unlicensed basis. The reason for that, I'm not entirely sure why, but that is not exactly untypical, because it does cost a lot of money to register a drug. So if you can sell it on an unlicensed basis, then why not? So what do I mean by a named patient supply or a named patient program? Well, it's basically the supply of an unlicensed medicine, so it's not been registered in your country, and it's supplying a medicine from an unsolicited order from a treating physician. The word unsolicited being key, because you cannot promote an unlicensed medicine much like you can promote a licensed medicine. And this is provided to patients either on a cohort or on an individual patient basis. Some of the other terms that you'll have heard, and of course we have heard, managed access via Marion, these are industry terms. You also might have heard of compassionate supply, and compassionate supply tends to be supply of an unlicensed medicine free of charge. With a named patient program, there is the possibility of charging for that medicine. So, who's involved in this process? Well, obviously, key is the patient, and also key is the treating healthcare professional. It is the key to all of this is in fact the treating healthcare professional, because he's the one that will provide his local authority with what's known as a letter of clinical need. And in that he will state that he wants a particular drug, and these are the reasons why he wants that drug, and companies like mine obviously hear about this and then try and source that unlicensed medicine. Obviously key to all of it as well is the pharmaceutical company, without whom or which we wouldn't have this treatment. And also the regulatory agency have an involvement, as well as potentially the payers if it's on a chargeable basis. So, the regulatory agencies involved, we have the European Medicines Agency. There's something like 100 different regulations throughout all of the EU countries involved in supplying unlicensed medicines. And obviously here in the UK we have the MHRA, who clearly are involved in the process as well. They're the ones that will bless and give you permission to import an unlicensed medicine. So, towards the patient side of things and patient awareness, and I spoke with Charlotte, and I hope you don't mind me saying Charlotte, but Charlotte, she's not a member of a patient advocacy group, but she keeps her ear to the ground as to what's going on in terms of new treatments that are coming onto the market, or perhaps research within the area that the condition you suffer. And this is a result of social media and the internet. It truly has brought us all together in a global way. So patients have educated themselves more and more about the awareness of these potential life-saving medicines. And of course, the patients themselves and the patient advocacy groups, which they are members of or involved in, they're obviously out there finding new patients and getting more and more people involved globally. They're obviously promoting new research and asking governments to invest perhaps money into research in our national institutes, and also lobbying pharma companies. So the long and short of it is that you find that patients now and patient advocacy groups are certainly engaging with the pharmaceutical companies themselves directly, which I think is a great thing, and that obviously we'll come on and expand on that. So, right, so why would a healthcare professional request an unlicensed drug? Well, clearly it has to be an unmet medical need, so there's no other treatments out there. And he hears about this, again, much like the patient. Physicians educate themselves as to what's going on in their field of expertise. And, of course, they might read about this new drug and think, well, I have patients that are presenting with this rare disease, and I'm interested in getting hold of this medicine on an unlicensed basis. So it's typically a new, innovative product, new medicine, and it's typically for an orphan and rare disease. So, to understand a physician and the way they approach this, so there are guidelines, and I use the word guidelines, that a physician will look at or bear in mind when he's looking at a new medicine or a new product. So his first priority is to treat his patient with a licensed medicine. His second priority, if he can't get hold of a licensed medicine, is maybe a licensed medicine that's used what's known as off-label. So the label in this case is that the medicine treats a certain condition, but it has shown efficacy, it has shown benefits in another condition. So potentially he could use this licensed medicine for another condition where it's not been registered for. And the third, fourth and the fifth here is where we look at named patient programs. So here we have a medicine potentially, in my example, licensed in America but not licensed in Europe, that potentially he could request and give to his patient. And then we have the fourth and the fifth priority, where these are medicines that haven't been licensed anywhere in the world, but are manufactured to GMP, good manufacturing practice, or potentially completely unlicensed medicine that is not manufactured to GMP, but that really would be, let's say, anyway. So, named patient considerations. Now I'll look at the pharmaceutical biotech company and what they have to consider in this whole process. So they have to consider, is there a product available? It might be that they have very small manufacturing scales. So could they make the product available on a named patient program and maintain that supply of the medicine? Because clearly if it's a lifelong treatment, you can't stop after 6 months because you run out of product. What countries do we want to run a named patient program in? It might be that they only want to run a named patient program in countries where they plan on licensing the drug. Again, it's all part of a strategy that they have to consider. Pricing, well, that's an interesting one. So do they charge for their medicine or not? And we'll come on to that perhaps in a bit more detail later. So patient inclusion, exclusion criteria. We heard from BioMarion about how they wanted a particular type of patient to treat with their drug. Well, of course, it might be that the drug has to treat only females, only of a certain body mass, of a certain height. I'm just riffing here. But this is the type of thing that has to be considered in who you're going to give the drug to. So clearly a physician would have to perhaps have a criteria list of who can have it, who can't. The effect on a clinical trial. So if I'm going to give my product on a named patient basis into a certain country where there's maybe, I don't know, 10 patients, potential patients, and I want to run a clinical trial there. If I give it to them on a named patient basis, how am I going to run a clinical trial there? Because everyone, of course, won't bother with a clinical trial. They'll all access the medicine on an unlicensed basis. So these are all part of the considerations that a pharma company has to make. Obviously, there is obvious benefits here to a patient. They're accessing a medicine in an ethical, controlled manner that could be life-saving or certainly life-enhancing. For the pharma biotech company, obviously, it increases their profile, and of course it increases the product awareness. Yeah, this drug is coming. It allows them to establish a key opinion leader network prior to registration, and obviously interact with patient advocacy groups, which I think we've talked about in previous talks. And I'm going to talk about real-world data. We've heard that mentioned by Nigel BioMarion. Running a named patient program does allow you to capture real-world data. We have to bear in mind a named patient program is not a clinical trial. Quite often that is something that can be confusing for people that don't understand what a named patient program is. It's not a clinical trial. You cannot use any information from a named patient program in your regulatory submission. But what you can do during a named patient program is capture real-world data. So, for an example, and obviously I exaggerate my example, but just to give you an understanding. So it might be that ease of use of the drug. So the pharma company developed this fantastic oral medicine, the tablet's the size of a breeze block, and the patient has swallowing difficulties. Well, clearly they hadn't maybe thought about that when they were developing the tablet, but of course when you're running the named patient program and you're getting feedback from the physician, that would certainly give you some indication that perhaps you should look at a liquid formulation rather than a tablet formulation. So why do certain pharmaceutical companies, like my example, my small American biotech company in California, why is it they would not run a named patient program with all these benefits I've highlighted? Well, I don't know if many of you have been in America recently, but you'll watch television there. The first advert you see will be a doctor saying, use our medicine. Fantastic, this medicine, use our medicine. The next advert you see is a lawyer telling you, if you use this medicine and you've had any adverse reactions, you can sue them to death. So American firms, particularly American firms, seem to be extraordinarily worried about liability. And I'll come on to an example later about this. So the fact is, the product quality and it's being manufactured to its proper specification is the manufacturer is liable in that area. But it's the treating healthcare professional that is liable for any adverse reactions to the patient themselves. And as I said, certain American companies just can't get their head around that, where there is a request for their medicine on an unlicensed basis. Pricing as well, that's another sort of area of concern that we've come across, where they're not sure about what pricing to come in at on an unlicensed basis. And again, you know, as long as it can represent value for money, then you will find the payers will reimburse a company for their product. These concerns are really sort of, as I said, tend to be with American firms, but anyway, they are certainly not insurmountable. So, trying to summarise a little, you're finding now that pharmaceutical companies, they rely on publishing positive data. That's what keeps their share price nice and high. And they will be publishing any positive data, phase 2, phase 2B, interim phase 3 data, and letting everyone know, especially all the investors, how wonderful their potential product is. Now you have the physicians and the patients and patient advocacy groups hearing about this, reading about this, and getting aware of this, and approaching these pharma companies. So because then you have the physician who makes the decision to prescribe this unlicensed medicine, and then of course the pharma company has to consider whether they're going to run a named patient program, and then we have the payers, etc. And then a company like mine get involved with the regulatory approval of the importation of that medicine and supplying and delivering that medicine. So, if I missed anything here, no. So, in summary, patients out there in the audience, keep educating yourselves and watching out for any clinical news. Really, approach those pharma companies, write them letters, send them emails, asking them for more data. And equally the same with physicians, keep up to date with what's going on out there. There are a lot of pharma companies out there, small, medium-sized, that are developing these medicines. And the pharma companies themselves, my message to you would be, have a plan and an idea of how you're going to handle this. Because if you do get patient requests for your medicine, when it's maybe only in phase 2, make sure you have a plan of how to approach those patients and say to them yes or no. Because obviously there's a lot of ethical and moral dimensions to this. And quite often you find pharma companies leave it all to the very last moment. So I'll give you an example just to finish off. So we had patient in the Middle East. She was an Arabian princess, so clearly from quite a wealthy family. And she had a very rare disease, and she'd been in America getting treated for that rare disease and had come back to the Middle East and had requested my company to access this medicine she was being treated with. We approached the pharmaceutical company. It was a small, mid-sized American biotech company, and we asked them for the drug. And said, we've got this patient, and they want your drug, can you supply it on an unlicensed basis for us? And they refused. And fortunately, that lady was of sufficient financial wealth to fly back to America, pick up 3 months worth of supply and come back to the Middle East. Well, not everyone's in that financial condition to do that. But it was because the American pharmaceutical company were worried about the liability of supplying unlicensed medicine, which is a travesty, because as much as we tried to educate them, their lawyers didn't allow it. So anyway, that's all I have to say, and hopefully I haven't been too long so we can have an early lunch. Any questions?